Thank you for attending the Student Organization Summit, and we hope you enjoy the following session. If you're viewing this workshop after the live premiere, make sure to visit our YouTube channel or official website to see an archive of all past discussions and workshops. And now, on to your presentation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Leemon. I use she, her pronouns, and I currently serve as a program coordinator within student activities involvement at the University of Florida. I primarily advise our student organizations, but one of my major other duties as assigned roles has been to spearhead and implement an online training program for our student organization officers, which is what we will be reviewing today. Before we dive right in, I wanted to share a little bit about myself with you so you all can get a glimpse of my personality and passion. I'm a double dater and I really love UF. I'm a first generation graduate, so I really didn't have any type of affiliation with a college while I was in high school. But when I started at the University of Florida, I found such a strong supportive community, I immediately fell in love. Much of my undergrad time was spent working with Gator Nights, our premier late night programming free to UF students, which, as it turns out, was my door into this world of student affairs. I ended up staying at UF for my master's in student personnel and higher education, and I still wasn't ready to leave. So now here I am, full-time, working in the office that gave so much to me when I was an undergrad student. I will say I specifically selected the picture of me with our mascots, Albert and Alberta, where I wasn't crying of happiness, but yes, that has happened a handful of times now. It's okay. So jumping right into our agenda for today, as the title of this presentation may have indicated, we're going to be talking about student leader learning management systems, and specifically my experience with transitioning from an in-person training module to a fully virtual asynchronized model. First, we'll be talking about some learning outcomes. Then I will jump right into the history of our program here, the need for change we saw and the inspiration to make that change, the transition itself, where we'll deep dive into the timeline and process, and then finally wrapping up with the why. So this is the part of the presentation where if we were live, I'd ask you all, what type of student leader training module do you currently have at your institution? Even though we're not technically live, the greatness of technology allows me to still ask you all. So please humor me and take a moment to complete this quick survey. And you'll just scan the QR code with your phone. And if you would like to complete the survey, but do not have access to a QR code, please feel free to email me afterwards. I can send you that direct link. While you're completing that, I'd like to provide you with some initial context for this virtual transition that we did take. In the summer of 2020, we transitioned our mandatory student organization officer training to a completely virtual asynchronized model. This transition was due partly to the pivot to a virtual environment, but primarily due to listening to the needs of our student leaders. It was almost the perfect time for us to make this change, given the state of the world at the time. So while we certainly experienced challenges, there were also great successes to this pivot. Some of the learning outcomes I have for you all today during this journey together include the ability for you all to identify a need for change in the model at your own institution, understanding key steps and processes essential to making a virtual transition, articulating the challenges and successes of a virtual transition at your institution, and developing a plan of action to elevate your institution's student leader training model. Fingers crossed. So some of the history behind our program, just so you all know where we started. Mandatory training for our student organization leaders has not been a new endeavor. It has certainly seen various iterations and requirements, but historically the training our student leaders would receive was offered in person over the course of certain days of the week, was mandatory for at least one officer, and consisted of PowerPoint trainings, breakout sessions, and a resource fair. This system was very conference-like and not only limited the accessibility of the training for our students, but was very taxing for the staff in the office who would have to host multiple of these trainings over the course of a week, over the course of the year, for 4 years, and then thinking about students who might not have been able to make one of the trainings, now having to add additional trainings to accommodate those. This image here is an example of some of the key takeaways those previous trainings would have included. Keep these in mind, and as a little bit further, we will be going through some of the student feedback that really led for a need for change, or based off some of these takeaways that maybe weren't quite taken away. During times of transition with staffing in our department, it was quickly realized that this model was not sustainable for our team to continue with, and that it was time for us to see what changes we could make to elevate our student leader training experience. Over the course of fall 2019 and spring 2020, we administered a survey to all of our student leaders, and it clearly came to our attention that they felt the previous model was not accessible, not engaging, and generally not sustainable for them either. As you can see here, some of those key takeaways that were our goals from the previous model were not being met by our student leaders. So they weren't really getting the permitting information they needed. They weren't really understanding the transition process. They didn't really understand the resources that were provided. So we took the survey data our students had provided us with and created focus groups specific to organization type to hear directly from our student leaders what would be the best option moving forward. Overwhelmingly, the outcome was that a transition to an online model would be the best option. So we needed to provide more accessible trainings to our students that had more flexible options. And that really led to us to make the shift to a fully virtual and asynchronized online training module-based system. As you can see here as well, this is some of the feedback that we received in terms of that in-person training versus an online training, and really our students' desire for these trainings to be online. So now that we know we're going online, what did that process look like for us? The timeline for this transition really started back in 2019 with that assessment, but from there and with the data we gathered, transition itself began in February of 2020 with the initial software research. From the research, we moved into conversations with campus partners, pitching the idea for approval, and then creating the actual training modules. From there, it was time to distribute said modules so our student leaders could take them. And then, of course, assess kind of what we've done, if it's working, and recognizing that assessment is not just a linear process. So we're constantly reviewing the assessments we receive and adjusting the trainings based on that feedback. To kick off, let's dive deep into our software research that initially went into the process. First place we had to start on this journey was asking ourselves, how can we translate this in-person workshop to a fully virtual training that is informative, but also engaging? We didn't want this to be another PowerPoint training that our student leaders would just mindlessly sift through. We also didn't want this to be monotonous training that our student leaders would zone out to. Through benchmarking other businesses and departments at our institution, and of course, good old Google researching, we learned of what is called e-learning software authoring tools, specifically learning management systems. These programs are designed to produce and deliver digital learning experiences and allow for the automated administration, tracking, and reporting of the courses. First and foremost, we had to ask ourselves and our IT department if this was something within our limits to purchase based on software and licensing protocols. At our institution, there is a rigorous software and licensing process that IT security administers with any new software that wants to be purchased by a department. I would strongly encourage you to connect with your institution's IT to also see what processes and possible barriers may be in place for you as well when it comes to potentially downloading new software. I'll talk more on this process in a later conversation, but just keep that in mind. From this initial conversation on whether we could even download anything, really came to our attention that there were two top viable options, Adobe Captivate and Articulate Storyline 360. Our research found that when looking at e-learning software, there were a few things for us to keep in mind when deciding on a program to purchase that would be best for us. First was ease of use of the program. Really asking ourselves, what is the level of experience needed to use the software efficiently? What can customer service provide for us if we need assistance? Are there options for predetermined templates? And what does the end user experience look like? So as you can see here, it's kind of a comparative chart of the ease of use of Articulate Storyline and Adobe Captivate. So with Storyline, really it's set up very similar to PowerPoint. So the ability to import slides from PowerPoint is an option. There's what's called the Content 360 library. So it's kind of this virtual cloud where they have a variety of different templates, icons, images that you can use. There's some smart guides and help buttons as you're building the actual slides. And then there's a vibrant community that readily supports and answers any questions a user might have. For Adobe Captivate, it's part of the Adobe suite. So assets can be imported from Photoshop or any other Adobe program. You can have multiple projects shown as tabs, similar to how you might another Adobe project. And then their online library, since it's part of this Adobe suite, has over 25,000 layouts, scenarios, games, interactions, people's icons, and so forth. So both pretty on par. The next thing that we had to look for was the quality of content. And so this means kind of what does that output look like? Is it engaging? Is it interactive? And what are the various options for customizability to really keep our student leaders engaged? With Storyline 360, it has a really good interface. All of the buttons have text captions to make it functionally clear, really thinking about the accessibility. There's minimal lag and wait time when an operation is initiated. So as our students are going through the process, it's very responsive. And it does have the ability to have flexible questions that are interactive throughout the entire course. With Adobe Captivate, they have the ability to include virtual reality simulations to the course. They have out-of-the-box interactive video functionality provided, so kind of thinking more than just putting a video on a slide and having someone watch it. And then you can also include multiple animations to a single object to really make it very engaging. And then finally, sustainability. So how easily is it to edit, reuse, or scale these courses? Are they cost efficient? What are the collaboration options? And then ultimately, will our institution allow this software? Which we already knew they would allow these too, but again, just make sure to connect with your IT department to see what is allowed, what is not. So when it comes to Articulate Storyline, there were multiple publishing options as listed here. Our institution uses SCORM files, so knowing that it was accepted was also very helpful. Easily reusing the entire structure and setup of a new course. So really thinking copy and paste an entire project. You don't have to start from scratch and you can still manipulate the new file. And then with Articulate Storyline 360, it is part of a suite service. So it's the 360 suite, which includes the Storyline 360, the content library. It included a online review process, also the ability to create e-learning courses online, and a handful of other features to the suite. It was subscription based, so we'd have to purchase the entire suite and it's an annual renewal fee. But with that comes kind of automated updates to the system. So that was part of sustainability with Storyline. And for Captivate, it could be used on both Mac and Windows. So that was one thing about Storyline that was different, was it was only compatible with Windows computers. And then with Captivate, it is priced separately from the rest of the Adobe suite. So it's not part of kind of your Adobe Cloud where you could get Photoshop and Illustrator and Premiere. It was a standalone program, but it could be separated between a monthly based subscription or an annual subscription. So given all of this information and the criteria outlined, we went back to our campus partners, businesses, and Google to really understand what's going to work best for us. What does the research say? What does the review say? And with all of that, we ultimately landed on using Articulate Storyline 360. Once we established the e-learning system we were wanting to pursue, it was time to reconnect with our IT department to determine exactly how we would go about purchasing and installing that software. Our IT software security spent about a month reviewing the security of the actual program itself. So this was anywhere from processing power, what computers could or could not run it, and then really looking into software licensing and compliance for our university. Within the security processing, there were two major steps that the institution took. The first was having us run an integrated risk management survey, which essentially determined what type of data we were going to be collecting using this software, and to determine if there's any additional security features that might be needed within the software, especially when it comes to student data that might be protected. You can see here some of the questions asked to understand more of what the software would be doing so that IT security could move on to our step 2. So some of those questions of what the type of data are we collecting? We weren't collecting any kind of student records. We weren't collecting any kind of criminal justice information. So really going through this process and then moving on to that next step. For step 2, we entered what our institution refers to as fast path solutions. So based on that data security survey, it was determined that we were not collecting, storing, or transmitting or processing restricted data. And so there wasn't any additional security steps needed, and we were ready to move forward with the institution of approving the purchase. And so the institution moved forward with creating an FBS to allow IT to download the software to our computers. This process for new programs can take a few weeks, but the good news is that once a program has been vetted and approved, it exists on this FastPath Solutions database. So now any other unit or department who wishes to download Articulate Storyline can do so much quicker. It's just kind of then a matter of you have the software, you have to set up separately to pay for the subscription now that it's downloaded, which brings us to step 3. The final step of the purchasing process was, of course, to pitch the proposal to our department director and secure the funding to purchase the software itself. In order to effectively do this, I really created a chart similar to the one previous that outlined all of the really great things of Storyline 360, as well as the reasons that it was different from Captivate, but how those differences really elevated Storyline 360 to be what we needed. I really wanted to highlight that this was not just a departmental purchase because it was a fancy new toy, but the need for an e-learning system was supported by the needs of our students. Ultimately, this was the best option for our team because of its minimal learning curve as an author, kind of that correlation to using PowerPoint. The quality of content and output was still very high, and it really had a great interface for sustainability with the ability to make edits, adjustments to the files, collaborate, and constantly have access to a suite and get those updates with the subscription. It did take some conversations with our director because this was not the cheapest option. So really trying to justify why this is the one we ought to go with. But ultimately, keeping the student perspective in mind, we went ahead and got approval. So we moved forward with the purchase of Storyline 360. Finally, I will mention this a little more later, but we did start having conversations with our HR training and development department at the same time as we were having conversations with IT and our director, because ultimately the system that we were going to be using for distribution and implementation did come from HR. So really wanting to loop them into our hopes and start getting those conversations kicked off. But like I said, we'll be talking more about that. Now that we finally had our hands on the software, it was time to play around, of course. Not a fancy new toy, but always room to play. So I would like to preface this by saying that this is not a sales pitch. I will be talking on our individual experience with the software and encourage you all to do your own research and take advantage of the various trial and demo options for each system you might be interested in purchasing. So with that, let us go to Storyline. So this is what Storyline looks like when you first open it up. Pretty basic, not a lot going on. Some of the cool features that you'll notice are that you can insert certain objects, kind of those characters, photos, all from that content library. You can add media, text, and interactive objects. So it's all very laid out, easily kind of available for you to understand. You can add slides. So this right here is kind of our first slide. You can add slides as just a new slide, or you can import slides or view from that content library. So let's take a look at the content library. These are some of those pre-made templates that you might be able to utilize if you're not a designer or creatively talented in this field, like I'm not. And so you could kind of see what type of options are available, whether you like this vitality theme, you can have the whole theme. If you just like one specific element of that theme, you can add that as a slide, and really seeing, okay, I want some charts and graphs. You can sort them out by charts and graphs, and then you don't have to just stick to this template. So once you insert it, and you can double click or click insert, I will download the template to your program. And once it's there, you double click on that slide and it takes you into kind of that PowerPoint mode. So really being able to see the adding your own text, being able to manipulate kind of every piece of the image. You'll see down here that each element is what's kind of referred to as the pieces of your slide are adjustable. You can kind of insert any of these features that you might like. You can move things, so kind of time them to appear at later times, or you can have them all start at the same time. And then you can, when it comes to triggers, so triggers would be anything that makes an object or element do something. You can have actual trigger settings. So you can determine what the next button does, for instance, where you jump to the next slide, or you can jump to another layer of the slide. You can, if you don't want the back buttons, you can reverse that. So really just the ability to add a lot to each individual slide using those templates. Then there's the option for you to import. So kind of that crossover with PowerPoint, the ability to just import a PowerPoint presentation and then go forth and start editing each element is one of the draws that we had to this program. So you'd kind of open PowerPoint, select the file that you want to import, and then give that a minute to open. And so once you have it imported, it does take some time. This was pre-opened. You'll see all of the elements of your PowerPoint slide are now included here. So this was actually the PowerPoint that we would use for student leader training that I just imported. And as I mentioned, you can click right in. It pulls in all of the colors, all of the themes of your past information, and then allows you to manipulate each one. So for example, if we wanted to add maybe some trigger information to any of these slides, we could make this email button a hotspot. So this becomes a clear box. For us, it'll be green, but say it's a clear box, and then you can have the hotspot link to anything that you might need it to do. So here you have the slide triggers, the rectangular hotspot, and then you create a queue, you can rename the hotspot. And so for this instance, we can add it to automatically pull up our email account. So when they click on the hotspot, it will pull up the email and they automatically can send us an email. Or we could do the same thing with going to our social media page. It is all very similar to PowerPoint, like I mentioned, so you can use quick keys, right? So Control V, Control C, to add a new hotspot for you. You can add sliders, so if you want to do more customization as far as students being able to allow a range, if you're asking a question, add a button, so if you want students to be able to return home or to interact in any kind of way with what you have on the system, you add a button and then you add the trigger to what that button does. And so once you've created your course, you've gone through, you've made any adjustments that you might need to do, you've added audio, so you can insert pre-made audio, or you can insert from like the kind of computer automated audio. There's a couple different ways to save it or publish it. So for publishing, you want to review it first, right? You want to send it out to your stakeholders. You want them to have the opportunity to put their feedback in. You could do this review 360. So this is again part of the suite, which allows you to upload your training to kind of this cloud service. And then you share that link with anybody who now has access to leave comments on your actual course. They don't need an account. They don't need a subscription. It's all part of your own subscription. When you're ready to actually publish this, right? So thinking about what file type do you need in order to actually publish this? You would go to LMS output, so Learning Management System output, and this is where you would determine the type of output that you're going to be saving it as. So most of ours at our university use SCORM files, so you can just select SCORM, and then it will automatically report and track if you have any quizzes or any interactive kind of questionnaires within your system. So if we review 360 and we publish this, which I will not do, but I do have a published version here. This is what kind of your end as an author's publishing for 360 looks like. So these would be all of the files that I've published on this system to get some feedback from. So we'll take a look at kind of our very first iteration, which is part 1, version 1 from June. So here you'll be able to play it.
Welcome to the Student Activities and Involvement Officer.
We can go through each individual slide. You can see this is kind of one of those buttons. So you start your course. All of these are also interactive buttons. If there's a comment here, someone can leave a comment and say, hey, like, you know, only the first button was working. Was that supposed to be happening? And then the user would get an automated email to let you know. And then here, thinking about, you know, click on the door when you're ready to enter the office, instead of having like a button, right? It's a little more interactive. So they can click on the door and it leads to a video. You also have your back and forth here. The next question. So how many desks do we have? And then really just diving into each of these are clickable, leaving those comments, and then going through the training. So let's see some of these questions. So at the end of each of our trainings, we do have an assessment, right? We really want to be able to make sure that our students are taking away the information that we're providing to them. So the great thing about this particular system is that you can build in your questions directly into the course. So you've got kind of which of the following areas your students can, ask your question, and they go through, they don't get the right answer. It's very, quiz-like, kind of just click through them. And then at the end of your training, it will give them a score, right? So you set your passing score in the actual system. And then if they don't pass, it says, it's not been passed. They can review their quiz, they can retake the module, and have the ability to have a lot of leeway with how this works. So with that, we will move into our distribution and implementation. Right, now that we've created a file, we've gotten the feedback, we've made the necessary adjustments, it's time to get these posted, and it's time for our students to start taking them. So as I mentioned before, kind of keeping them in mind, it was time for our conversations with the HR Training Development Office to recontinue. Thinking back to our initial goals for the training, kind of this online transition, one of the biggest outcomes we were focused on was ease of use and access and flexibility for our students, while also ensuring their education and compliance. So from the conversations we had with some of those campus partners, and of course, with me being here forever, just some general institutional awareness that there is a system that exists within our university that's called My Training, which is hosted by SumTotal. So My Training is a portal system that's integrated into our university's HR department as a training management system for students, faculty, and staff at the institution. So let's go to My Training. So knowing that My Training already existed and was really easy for our students to access, all they have to do is log in with their student IDs. This was really the place where we were like, we want to house our training here. It's easy for them to search for activities. It's easy for them to check about their training transcripts. They can kind of not only search for our activities, but search for any other activities they might have taken in the past. So for example, a lot of our students have to take kind of a Gator Good course, which is done in My Training. So they've all used this at least once, which we figured would be very accessible for them and not a lot of a learning curve for them to understand how to access this particular portal. On our end, we really wanted to utilize this system because we had easy access to it as well as an office, as a department. And so what that meant was really meeting with our HR Training and Organizational Development Office, taking certain trainings ourselves. So we had to be trained on how to actually utilize the administration side of this, because it is an entire university-wide system. So anybody who has access to kind of the admin side of My Training has access to everybody else's training courses. So really wanting to make sure we understood how to upload a file, how to create the settings of that file, and how to publish it so that students could start taking it. So what that looked like for our team, once kind of the two of us were trained on this process, was having access to this administration button. So with this administration button, we're able to manage our activities. And so really kind of using this course code that we created of SAI 101 and SAI 102 to identify our two training modules, we're able to publish these courses, kind of see the updated dates, and then anytime we need to make a change or adjustment to the process, it's really easy to go in and just edit the file. So for example, say it's been a semester and we had some changes to some of the resources that are offered within the portal or within kind of our office space, and we want to include that information in our file. The first step would be to update Storyline, right? So open your original file, go to that section, make the necessary changes, publish it as a SCORM file, and then we come here to My Training, and we're able to go to the existing file that we have here. You can send it to stage, which basically means it is now moving into an editing area. And then these are all things that we were trained on. So promise that I just don't know this off the top of my head. But under optional, you're able to go to all of the optional information needed for your course. And so it's a web-based training, general. Here, in the event of updating things, right, you can see that we've had versional updates over the course of the past year. So originally uploaded a file, realized that I misspelled quite a few things. So I had to upload a new file with kind of a note to myself. It was for grammar. Had another update for spring so that we kind of adjusted some of the language, adjusted some of the policies, and then updated some of the audio, kind of constantly making edits and elevating this course for our students, and then had our kind of fall 2021 update. So we'll be due for another update soon, but this is really where you're able to do that. So you can put the reason why, and then you can browse and upload that new file. It makes it really quick and convenient. Once you're done making any of the necessary changes on here, you validate it for production, and the system itself will actually check to make sure if there are any errors in what you've provided. So if anything's wrong, if they're not going to find it, if something isn't linking properly, it'll tell you that there's an error and how to fix it, which is really, really helpful. But once it's done, if there's no errors, then you move it back over to production, which means that it is now published and live again for students to have access to. And so really working with our HR department to learn all of the ins and outs of this system, to understand how it works, and to have access to publishing and editing has been a life changer for being able to distribute our trainings to our student leaders. All right, so now that we have been able to kind of work with our HR department and get this distributed and implemented, it was kind of time to move into, is this working, right? Thinking about the assessment piece of our training model. It has been about 1.5 years now since we originally published. And so we have quite a bit of data and feedback that we've gathered from there to really understand whether this new system has been working and how we can continue to constantly edit and elevate the system. So our first assessment point is really data-driven and understanding the retention of the content provided to our students. Within each of our training modules, Storyline allowed for us to create those quizzes and graded assessments at the end of each training. And the grades of each module are then tracked on My Training and are able to be accessed by our team using a reporting tool on the portal. By reviewing these reports, we're able to see how many of our students obtain a passing score the first time they take the models, how many might have to retake the models, what is the average passing rate, and really gives us the opportunity to see a snapshot of how our students are learning and which modules they might not be retaining information in quite as well. As you can see here, these are our current pass-fail rates for each module as of fall 2020. The data tells us that our Module 2, which is our SAI 102, has a much lower passing rate than Module 1. And even Module 1 has a lower than ideal pass rate. For future exploration, something that our team is really wanting to focus on and see if we can integrate or connect back with our HR department on is what might be the reason for these low pass rates. Recognizing that these trainings are roughly 20 minutes long and some of the timestamps on them are only 5 minutes, which could just mean that our students are clicking through and might not be retaining the information. And seeing if our HR department is able to help us really analyze which questions are being missed out of each training, if there's a way to pull those individual student reports to understand what that looks like, might be super helpful. But overall, we've had a lot of students complete the training and have a 73% passing rate, including multiple attempts. And the maximum multiple attempts taken by a single student for our second module was 11 times. So it can be repeated multiple times as long as the student eventually passes it. And we've set predetermined pass rates for each module. So for our 101 module, it was an 80% pass rate. For a 1 or 2 module, it was a 90% pass rate. So really only giving students the ability to miss one question on that second module, because that module is specifically about regulations and requirements for student leaders. The other formalized assessment that this process allows us to capture is feedback data. So at the end of each module, students are sent an automated link from the My Training system, asking them to complete a survey about their experience with the course. I will say that this particular assessment right now is kind of the standard one that is provided by the My Training system. So it doesn't have very pointed questions, it doesn't have very specific questions, but it does ask some general student feedback. And so given that feedback, we really have been able to see that our students generally are enjoying the course. And so 86% of our student leaders who complete the course are extremely likely to recommend this course to another student leader. 99% of our student leaders agree that the course was worth their time. And then based on each module themselves, 84% agree that the first module, which is about our resources in the office, improved their knowledge and skills, and 87% agreed that that second module about regulations and requirements also improved their knowledge and skills. So thinking about those key takeaways again, kind of the resources piece, are students understanding, are they learning? Our online modules really have contributed to the growth in that feedback. The final form of assessment we receive is, of course, informal feedback that our students might share. So while this transition has been widely generally received well, there are cases where a student might have a lot of feedback to provide us with, where they might either want to set up a meeting with us or send us an email with that feedback. So really just creating a space to allow our students to express how they're feeling and let us know what we can do to really make this better. And from a lot of that feedback, we've made some changes to make sure that future training iterations and versions are just continually getting more and more to the needs of our current student population. All of this feedback really helps to inform our future practice and any changes we may need to make to the system, as well as take the great stuff that is working and incorporate it into other facets of our office. For example, the feedback we received about this ease of access and flexibility has translated to providing a similar virtual training experience for our student organization advisors. So now our advisor training modules are also completely virtual. You might have seen them earlier. And we can keep kind of the same course code. It's SAI. Instead of 101, it's 201. So really keeping things structured, keeping things streamlined, and having our advisors now have the flexibility to take training online as well. Not only within our department, but recognizing that some of the needs of our students from our initial surveys were that they really wanted more of that SG funding piece, that financial piece and student org funding. We connected with our funding team kind of across the hall to give them that feedback, and then worked together to help them also create a course like this for themselves. So now they have their own course, also completely online, providing details for students to understand the funding process, the how-tos, and the ins and outs. All this being said, you may be asking yourself, what does this mean for me? Why did I just spend the last 40-ish minutes listening to me talk? That's a great question. After reflecting on our own experiences with this transition and seeing the outcome now about 1.5 years later, there's a few key takeaways I would love for you all to consider as we end our journey together today. Really think about your current training model and why it exists the way it does. How long has it been this way? Is it working? How do you know if it's working? Have you talked to your students about it? One of the really great quotes, or I guess thoughts, that I've heard recently is just asking the why, right? Like a lot of times certain processes are in place because they've been in place and no one has really questioned why they're in place. So really ask yourself, why are we doing this? How long have we been doing this? Does it need to stay this way? And have you talked to your students about it? Really keeping the students at the center of your change. And so with that, are you ready for change? What can this change look like? what needs to be changed and why, what is your next logical best step to making that change. So kind of thinking back to your students, have they given you the feedback? Have you asked for the feedback? Is it feasible for you to make a change? Is it necessary for you to make a change? Even if you're not going from kind of maybe a completely in-person type of training to a completely virtual, are there ways for you to incorporate more engagement into your in-person sessions? Ways for you to make it more interactive, hybrid options, kind of what can that next step really be for you? And then how can you take the information provided today to really help elevate your transition to potentially using a virtual platform for student organization leaders training? For those of you who might be currently operating in a hybrid model, is there room for you to maybe expand it to fully virtual or offer a fully virtual component and then give them the opportunity to still meet with you if they prefer that in-person situation? And then maybe for those of you who your institution is only operating pre-recorded, is there an option for you to make it more engaging using some of these learning management system tools in order for students to not just really sit there and watch a pre-recorded video and learn about the resources your office might have to offer, but really get them engaged and get them to kind of feel like it's an interactive experience that they have. My hopes are that you really take this time to listen and learn from the needs of your students and ask yourself, what is your current model? Is it working? And what can you really do next? With that, I just want to thank you all so much for spending the past 45-ish minutes with me. I hope that you were able to take away some of those key information and pieces from our experiences here at my institution with virtual training to be able to determine whether it could be a viable option for you at your institution. If you do have any additional questions about the process, about kind of learning more about how to use the system, working with your HR department, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to connect with you. This has been kind of my birth baby for the past year and a half, so I am very, very passionate about what we've been able to do and what we'll be able to accomplish in the future. So have a great end of the fall and happy holidays.
Thank you for watching this presentation. To see other presentations, workshops, and discussions, feel free to utilize our YouTube channel or official website.